Hello everyone, welcome back to Minutes in Maya, where we go over tips, tricks, and tools that you can do in Autodesk Maya. In today's video, we are finishing off the rest of the primitives that you can easily find in your poly modeling shelf, or in this first section of your poly modeling shelf, and that is going to be covering the disk and the plane option. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of our torus. And I'm going to go ahead and bring up the plane options. Now again, to create a plane, you can do a couple different things. The first is by going up to your poly modeling shelf, clicking on this flat square object, and creating it there. You can also create it through the Create Polygon Primitives plane. And you can also hold Shift and right click, and then pick over to the plane option. I'm going to go ahead and go to this square to the right of it to bring up the options. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit apply to create a plane. Now, the reason I want to go over the plane and the disk together is these are both 2D pieces of geometry. This means that they don't have any, they only work in 2 dimensions, which can mean a couple different things. For one, and probably the most importantly, is that they only have materials on one side of their object. So if I was to look at the underside of the object, you see how this is all shaded black here. This means that there are no UV maps and there can be no UV textures applied to this underside of the object because it is just a 2D piece of geometry here. If I was to go ahead and assign some material, let's say I assign a Lambert and then make it, let's say, green. Something like that. You can see on the underside it is still black, and this will not show up in rendering. It will not show up in any other 3D viewports that look at materials. It is always going to be shaded black like this because there are no UV interactions with it. So that is the first thing that we're going to go over. Now let's go over the options that you can work with in a plane. The first option that you have is your width option. This width option changes the length that you have primarily on the x-axis if you have it facing the y-axis. So if I was to change this to something like 14, you can see that it is increasing along that x-axis here. The second option that we have is our height option. That is going to change it along the z-axis if it is facing the y-axis here. So if I was to go ahead and add in something like 5 here, you can see how it is increasing along the z-axis. And now, again, because this is a 2D piece of geometry, we don't have an option for depth. That depth option is going to be aligned with wherever you have your object aligning on the creation. So by default, you usually just have it facing the y direction. If I turn on my move tool, you can see this green arrow indicating the y direction has none of the dimensions that can manipulate this plane. If I was to go ahead and create another one along the x-axis, you can see that it is facing the x-axis as its upward facing placement. And if I was to change the width and the height divisions, that's going to change it along the y and the z instead of the x and the z. And then something similar would happen if I aligned it to the z position. Hit apply. Here you can see the UV side is facing the z-axis. If I change its width and height, it's going to be along the x and the y respectively. Alright, so that just, the width and the height change the base size of the object. With divisions and height divisions affect how many pieces or how many individual slices and polygons are between those height divisions here. So if I was to add in subdivisions along the width, it's going to add in subdivisions along the whatever axis the width is aligned to. In this case, for this plane, it's aligned to the x-axis. And if I add in more, it's going to add in more divisions along the x-axis. If I go down to 1, it'll just take them all the way. And then the same thing for the height. The height, if I add in more, it's going to add in more divisions along that axis that is representing the height, in this case the y-axis. If I go down, I can go all the way down to 1. And now we just have one singular polygon piece, which is this plane here. Now, most of the time, you're probably not going to want to create a single polygon. You probably want to have a little bit more geometry to start with. But if for whatever reason you want to work with one polygon, you can do that. And then our UV options, again, are pretty standard. You can toggle whether you want to create UVs or not to create UVs, and you can change whether you want them to preserve aspect ratio, i.e. do you want them all to stay the same relative size to what they look like in the viewport.